Hawa. Hey, much love and respect. Pura vida, mi gente. Yeah, so we're going to get back into this book. We're in volume 2 of this book. We read volume 1 already. This is Ancient and Modern Britons by David MacRitchie. Again, volume 2. And guys, just so you know, we're doing this with a live audience. So I got my members here listening. We were already on for a while and decided to go ahead and record this while they're here watching. So if you want to support me that way, you can become a channel member. We're going to have a lot of exclusive videos like this, a lot of live recordings. All right, so again, we're going to be getting into another chapter or some more info on this book, Ancient and Modern Britons, Volume 2. So again, Ancient and Modern Britons, a retrospect, Volume 2. This is from 1884. 1884. So we're going to go to chapter 6. Right here, this is on page 168, but we're not going to read the whole thing. We're actually going to go towards the end of chapter 6, and so we can get into chapter 7. It's going to this one repeats a lot of the stuff it already has talked about when it comes to the clans, the gypsies, the difference of who the original indigenous, what they're calling the Indian or Swarthy, Pigs, Gypsies, right? Original people, and then the newcomers like the Normans and the Brits and somebody and other people that came in. Okay, so we go to page all the way to 186, right? We're going to start in the middle of this paragraph. Basically the whole chapter, again, it was saying how it was making a distinguishment of the people pre-12th century, and then after, how it just started changing. A lot more light complexion people started coming in, taking over these locations. On 186, it says here, but when we first dimly see this conflict of opinions in Scotland, namely, in the 12th century, the winning party was pretty clearly composed of so-called white races, lighter-skinned people. And the people whom they overcame and whose lands they appropriated for uses of civilization were more distinctly of black complexion, right? Being the nimble blackamoors of Claudian, with their conquerors somewhat different in manners, but also thirsting for blood. The Scot Egyptians or Gypsies, Egyptians, right? Egyptians. Why? Because they come in, a lot of these people from the real ancient Egypt, the Americas, so-called Gypsy, Scot Egyptian, Scotia, which included literally Ireland, and in the borderlands as elsewhere. Various clans descended from the Black Heathens, the Danes, the Black Heathens, Danes, we're talking about Black Vikings. It is important to consider this, because although we have seen that various British gypsies regarded as unmixed gypsies by more than one modern gypsyologist are quite void of any trace of black blood. He's talking about the lighter skinned ones, it doesn't look like they have any trace of black blood. Yet there can be no doubt that the great portion of the unreclaimed sections of the British people, popularly called gypsies, are of swarthy skin. Okay? So swarthy that in the estimation of most men, to be like a gypsy is to be black-haired, black-eyed, and of dark complexion. Right? Therefore, in whatever way the white gypsy may be accounted for, it is plain that the orthodox gypsy is descendant from at least two of the black races of Britain. At least two, because a diligent student of such people has told us that even in England there are straight haired and curly haired Romanis, the two indicating not a difference resulting from the white admixture, but entirely different original stocks. Entirely different original stocks. Because also, with regard to Scotland, we have seen that not only at least two, but at least three black races, so called black, have entered that country. The nimble blackamoors, not wrongly named the painted folk, the black herds of Egyptians, so called Egyptians, right? Or Scots, Egyptians or Scots, and the black heathen, pirates from the Cimbric channels. None of these races were the ultimate rulers of any part of Britain. And although nowadays the dark whites, the dark whites, listen, and fair whites, so there's dark whites, that's what I was saying, light skin, more light skinned people, which a lot of them were melanated, it was just a lot lighter. But then there's also the fairer ones, more paler ones of our country have long been inextricably mingled. Yet the white element is beyond a doubt numerically the greater, and the prevailing modern British sentiment is distinctly white, while the popular speech is full of expressions. The speech, though, listen, that render a black or a synonym, whether justly or from mere racial hatred, or everything that is objectionable, right? And so that's how that chapter ends after explaining who these invading people were. Like it goes into detail, the new after the 12th century. We're going to go into chapter 7. And it says here, when the children of Ettrick Dale farmers, exploring among the border hills about 100 years ago, encountered most formidable bands of this Roman people, or when some remote farmhouse entertained a gang of such wanderers for the night, repaid by an evening of border minstrelsy, and the knowledge that they had made friends of possible foes, at the period when the state of things indicated in the first volume of Blackwood constituted the life of the Scottish borderland. At that time, we can distinctly see that Southern Scotchmen were divisible into two wholly different sections, the one composed of prosaic, hard-working, sedentary yeomen and shepherds, the other of unresting clans of fighters, minstrels, and hunters. The entirely opposite character of either class was tacitly admitted by each. The shepherds and husbandmen did not court the society of the gypsies, whom they stood in considerable awe of. The gypsies looked down upon the bucolics with the most lordly contempt, though often utilizing their dwellings and substance for their own uses. To what extent this difference was one of blood is a problem that is most difficult to solve. This, at least, is certain, that those fierce Moravian gypsy clans were no other than the borderers, of whom Scott has written so much. Their very surnames tell us this, border history, and when not solely border, then British history, is interwoven with their names for many long centuries, excluding altogether the deductions of the foregoing chapters, and accepting as gypsies only those who have hitherto been popularly accepted as such. Here are some of the names of gypsy, right? Or Egyptian tribes. Egyptian tribes, right? We got the Douglases, which means black, dope, Douglas, remember? Gordon, Lindsay, Reuven, Montgomery, Shaw, Irvin, Heron, Fenwick, Allen, Rutherford Young, Bailey, Featherstone, Simpson, the Simpsons, Ironton, Kennedy, all right, remember Kennedy, Sterling, Heath, Wilson, Tate, Graham, Jameson, Jeddies, Gray, Brown, Robertson, Anderson, Jorkston, Fall, Johnstone, Blythe or Blythe, Flecky, Ross, Wallace, Wilkie, Marshall, Miller, Halliday, Gavin. All right, now remember, these are your gypsy clans that they know these are strict. When you say you're from these families, you're straight gypsy. You come from the gypsy people, you come from the Swarty. Gypsy people. They were calling Skoto, Egyptian, so-called pigs, Moors. All of these names, the names of supposed interlopers of 3 centuries back, are of distinctly British association, and some of them are the oldest in these islands. And although in some of these examples the owners of the names appear as isolated individuals, others are mentioned as clans, as gypsy clans, such as the Kennedys, the Douglases, the Herons, the Gordons, the Rubens, the Johnstones, and so on. The very clans that have been the most prominent in North British history, that such names have been borne by men who have been civilized, and whose individual line has been civilized for as many generations as they can prove. We all know. But individual families do not make a tribe. Individuals whose habits and manners are those of the ever-changing present are of no use in studying the past. When one wishes to learn what the manners of an earlier period were, one does not look to the men and women who follow the fashion, changing from generation to generation. One must look at the people who do not change. The Douglas, who in the 15th century became the follower of King James of Scotland, was a sensible man who understood the spirit of his age. But for that very reason, he was not a representative man of the past, because he adapted to something else. He to modern times and to, you know, becoming a follower of King James in Scotland. He kind of changes his customs and manner. He was ready to adapt himself to any change that might come. It was the Douglases who would not change that represented an earlier day and a previously existing polity. Those Douglases continued to live on as they had always done, not adopting newer customs, not acknowledging an alien king. Remember, when we talk about an alien king, why? Why are they saying that? King James is a steward. The stewards were Normans. They were not original indigenous people to the highlands. They had come later on in the 12th century. This is what he was saying earlier. Okay? So that's why they call him an alien king. Not intermarrying with those of other races, but continuing their tribal life and consequently maintaining their own individuality of type. And such men were gypsies, the ones who didn't change, right? So, King James, we know, was swarthy, most likely what they were talking about, the dark whites, the dark whites. Apparently, the first recorded instances of particular borderers being styled Egyptians was only 300 years ago, when on the 8th of August, 1592, Simpson, Arrington, Featherstone, Fenwick, and Lancaster were hanged at Durham, being Egyptians, hanged, right? Hanged. Who were they hanging? In the States, hanged. By what means a borderer was recognizable as an Egyptian is a matter that could be very easily decided if we were sure that gypsies were invariably swarthy. That's how they recognized them, because of their dark complexion. That a borderer differed distinctly in appearance from the people of other districts is quite clear. When, as Scott tells us, a borderer was prohibited from entering or dwelling in the central parts of Scotland without a passport, it is evident that something in his appearance prevented him from traveling through those districts undetected. If one were not hampered by this tremendously loose application of the term gypsy, a term applied to men of all complexions, one would say he was recognizable because he was a gypsy. Indeed, they were so recognized, whatever the term may be held to include. In the latter part of the 17th century, the Annandale borderers, the thieves of Annandale, were known to the burghers, or the middle-class burgers, right? Burgess of Wigtown by a rather odd variation of one of the Scotch equivalents for card, or card, a tinker or gypsy, namely jockey. We are told by a writer of the year 1684 that they, the people of Wigtown, have a market for horses and young fillies with the borderers from Annandale and places thereabout. The style the country calls them by is Johnnies, coming by in great numbers. Now there can be little doubt that those borderers of Annandale were jockeys, that is, gypsies, whether the writer just quoted had altered the name for the sake of euphony, or whether those Wigtown people really did use another form. So that if those Wigtown burghers and agriculturists understood a black man, all right, a black man by a gypsy, as William Penn, just like William Penn did at exactly that period. You guys hear that, right? Certainly did, then those Annandale borderers were gypsies of the orthodox black skinned kind. All right. Again, history, they never teach us. They don't want us to know this stuff. And if so, then it is likelier still that Simpson, Arrington, Featherstone, Fenwick, and Lancaster, who were hanged at Durham 800 years earlier, 1592, for being Egyptians, were also gypsies of the orthodox Swarthy type, so called black. All those families, right? All those clans, all right? You guys listening? Moreover, it would appear that the southwestern corner of Scotland had not developed a caste of dark whites, in the year 1684, or at any rate, that there was still considerable part of its population that had refused to mingle its blood with that of the opposite, the white party. For the same writer of 1684 tells us that at that day the parish of Port Patrick, Winstonshire, was yet called the Black Quarter of the parish of Inch, of which parish Port Patrick had once formed a part. And this Port Patrick was one of the boundaries of the Kennedy Kingdom. And it was at this port, at various times in his career, that Will Marshall and his band of swarthy pigs embarked in the ship of the Picarduck to encounter their Irish kindred. All right, again, their Irish kindred of the opposite coast, who most likely, what if they're the kindred? Swarthy too, right? Scotia included ancient Ireland, thus granting that all the gypsy followers of Billy Marshall were dark-skinned men. There is plenty of reason why not only one but many districts of Galloway should be fitly known as black so recently as 1684. All right, this is a lot of good drop right here. A lot of people say no, it's not called black because it was black. No, it literally was. Like, we've broken this down in this book in volume 1. He literally went over that. The topography, the names, that's why it was being a lot of things called black this, black river, black. Literally is because of these dark-skinned people that inhabited that area, since very remote times, The Black Quarter of the parish of Inch was one of the boundaries of the kingdom founded by Kenneth, or Sinead. Remember Kenneth the Black, right? Kenneth, he's a famous, you can Google him, literally. They call him Kenneth the Black. Simpson does not tell us whether the Kennedys were black-skinned gypsies or not, though he includes them among the 3 principal clans of Tweeddale, gypsies. The other 2 being the Baileys and Rubens. When the Kennedys had retreated to the wilds of Tweeddale, they, like the Black Douglases, had been driven some distance from their earlier home. But a son of one of the kings of Carrick, Walter Kennedy, a celebrated minstrel, was plainly of tawny skin. Tawny. He was of the latter part of the 15th and the beginning of the 16th century, and is remembered chiefly for his flyting with his contemporary Dunbar, a kind of rhyming battledore and shuttlecock, the language on either side being Billingsgate of the most pronounced description. Now, I don't know if I'm guessing here, but it sounds like these people can flow, can rap, Is that what they're talking about? Like, how these, I see all these old Middle Ages movies, right? When they show these people singing and kind of rapping to the guitar. That's what I picture. And this flighting his opponent taunts Kennedy with his complexion, using such expressions as these: thy scalded, scorched skin, hued like on saffron bog, blackened is thy blee, your complexion is black, blackish, barefoot, barned, lound like mahound. Example, Saracen. Fee, vi, fiendly front, devil like visage, vices. always denote that this Irish Stephen minstrel, another of Dunbar's pretty epithets, was of gypsy blood, which quite bears out his reported descent from the Egyptian Scot Kennedy of the 9th century. We're just talking about swarthy people, the Kennedys of the 9th century, right? Listen to all the stuff they were trying to call him because of his complexion. As Kennedy retorts upon Dunbar in similar terms, it would seem that both of them, like a contemporary royal minstrel, Peter the Maurian, were of the same race as those earlier black junglers of the John of Rampayne anecdote. Kennedy speaks of Dunbar as Lucifer's lad, Fauls Fiends, Face Inferno, Saracen, Juggler, and Jow, which last title, it appears, means nothing else than thinker or gypsy. Therefore, if this Kennedy was a good representative of his tribe, the Kennedys were gypsies of the genuine kind, okay? The Kennedys were gypsies, but we're talking about of the genuine kind. These remarks have been rendered necessary by the fact, which has forced itself forward, that the term gypsy has certainly been applied of late years, if not earlier, to people who do not belong to either of the two black stocks that Mr. Leland regards as making up the gypsies proper. Mr. Simpson gives us many instances of gypsies who were fair-skinned, blue-eyed, yellow-haired, the very opposite of the conventional gypsy. All right? Guys hearing, right? In general, when you said gypsy, we were talking about dark-skinned complexion people. So now we got these fair-skinned, blue-eyed, yellow-haired, the very opposite of what what the image of a gypsy was. And unquestionably, if one looks at any gathering of Scotch nomads, such as that seen annually at St. Boswell's Fair, which Mr. Simpson characterizes as an Asiatic encampment in Scotland. Black Asiatics, huh? One sees that not only a few, but the great majority of those campers are Chantocro. If such people are to be called gypsies, then the word has completely lost its original signification. And it really has done so in Scotland, if not elsewhere. Not only does Mr. Simpson speak of the white-skinned Baileys and others as gypsies, but the celebrated colony at Jetholme was composed of tribes of perfectly opposite stock. One who visited that neighborhood 50 years ago writes thus of the inhabitants. The principal names of the gypsies residing at Jetholme are Fa, Young, Douglas, and Blythe, or Blighty. The two latter are the most numerous, but they are evidently not of the same race. The Douglases, the Faws, and the Youngs are generally dark complexioned with black hair, while the Blythes or Blighties mostly are light-haired and of fair complexion. If then gypsy is to be held to mean nothing more than heathen, as in Dutch heathen, or Tory, Tory, or nomad, although at one time it bore special reference to those gypsies who were swarthy Egyptians, all right, swarthy Egyptians from real Egypt, from the real ancient Egypt descendants. Then it becomes a matter of great difficulty ever to determine the ethnological position of the various tribes of borderers. It both simplifies the question and complicates it. It renders it easy to understand how an ordinary fair white might be able to prove a descent from a genuine border gypsy. Wow. And to prove that none of that lineage were anything else than fair whites, and yet to know that there was no contradiction between the physical appearance of all the clan and their title of gypsy or borderer. All right, that's kind of deep right there. Do you go back to the original gypsies, the swarthy, dark-skinned, so-called black gypsies? Can you prove that? The point that needs to be ascertained is the date of which gypsy first became indiscriminately applied. But at least those turbulent, marauding, non-agriculturist clans of borderers were clans of gypsies, forming as distinct a species in the time of Maitland and Lettington, as in the time of the Ettrick Shepherd. The borderers of Annandale were the Gypsies of Annandale, whether we regard them as jockeys, Johnnies, right, in parentheses, or under their well-known designation of the thieves of Annandale. They were common thieves, commonly called Egyptians. And when one of their most daring leaders, Johnstone, was hanged at Dumfries last century as a notorious gypsy, it was still the thieves that attempted a rescue. It was against the denomination of those common thieves, commonly called Egyptians, that Sir Richard Maitland of Lettington in the 16th century complained so bitterly, ending his complaint with the fervent prophecy, right? Yet or I die. Some saw them see hung on a tree, who healed they be dead. A prophecy that was fulfilled in his own and subsequent generations. Those 16th century common thieves, commonly called Egyptians, not only exacted a black tribute from the non-combatant people of Ettrick Forest and Lauderdale, and even of the Lothians, but they had so sworn upon those unfortunate people that their houses were harried of food and chattels, and themselves almost reduced to famine. As already pointed out, the position of those 16th century Egyptians, in parentheses, was that of a fierce, idle, Moravian aristocracy, employed sometimes by the Scotch king to overawe his citizens, fighting occasionally on the king's side against England, fighting incessantly among each other. So that's what we kind of skipped on the last chapter. They were explaining that a lot of these dark complexion gypsies were a lot of times fighting for the kings, the newcomers, you know, and they use them as, their soldiers. Such Egyptians as those hanged at Durham in 1592, Simpson, Arrington, Featherstone, and Fenwick, or such as Francis Heron, king of the Foss, who was buried at Jarrow nearly 2 centuries later, may be taken as representing those of the southern border. Our English Tories, as they were once called, right? Tories. While on the northern side were the Gordons, Douglases, Johnstones, Irvins, and other tribes, whose latest battles and whose ways of living are pictured to us in Mr. Simpson's history. From what period the borders presented this scene of strife and rivalry between people of that sort, one cannot definitely say. We have seen that we may go back 1,000 years at least to find anything different. There is no doubt that not long before the ascension of Kenneth MacAlpin, right, Kenneth the Black, to the Pictish throne, the kingdom of Northumbria, example, the borders, and a great extent of territory stretching south and north of that district, seems to have fallen into a state of complete disintegration, and we find a number of independent chiefs, or dukes, as they are termed, appearing in different parts, dukes, dukes, that's Esau's people, dukes, appearing in different parts, coming in different parts of the country and engaging in conflict with the kings and with each other, slaying and being slain, conspiring against the king and being conspired against in their turn, all right, expelling him and each other and being expelled. And such expelled dukes, whether pigs of the earlier Moorish or of the Egyptian Scottish or of the Black Danish division or of a jumble of all three, must have been people like the swarthy Duke Andrew, with the Druidess, his wife, who are recorded as having entered Bologna in the year 1422, and of whom, or whose like it was said, that the men were black, their hair curled, black men with curly hair, the women remarkably black, and all their faces scarred. Duke Andrew's era was the beginning of the 15th century, while that of Mr. Skene's Northumbria, Faux Dukes, was about the 9th century. But those of the latter who were expelled, not killed, must have left representatives in one part or other of Europe, and conversely, Duke Andrew and his following of lean, black, and hideous Egyptians, must have had ancestors during the ninth century who were as likely to be living in Northumbria as in any part of the world, just as the thieves of the northern side of the borders were distinctly recognizable as borderers or gypsies, whether we ought to accept the latter term in its strictest sense or not. So were those of the southern districts, Herons, Fenwicks, and others. They were dubbed Egyptians, right, in parentheses, and hanged as such. Hanged. The English borderer was quite as much an object of aversion to the burghers of the north of England towns as his brother of Scotland was to the Scottish burghers. We are told that there existed formerly a by-law of the Corporation of Newcastle prohibiting any freeman of that city to take for apprentice. Freemen and apprentices, a native of the territory known as the Waste of Bewcastle, the home of those Mossers, which again indicates a racial difference. All right, these are the words that he knows indicated people that look different, different complexions. But today we don't, they don't teach us this stuff when we hear these things in these old writings. That, in spite of the modern white gypsy usage, like I was just saying, this difference was one of color. Is most probable, since in this quarter also the tax exacted by those Moravian chiefs was known by the peaceable caste as black tribute. One of the latest distinct specimens of those chiefs, Henry the Fall, who circa 1700 and 1750 was received and ate at the tables of people in public office, being a member of that clan whose Jethum representatives a century after are pictured to us as dark complexioned with black hair. This Henry the Fall was accustomed, it will be remembered, to receive from men of considerable fortune a gratuity called blackmail in order to have their goods protected from thieves, a gratuity which their forefathers had paid to another common thief of an earlier day, the notorious Jock Armstrong. In the Scotch Highlands, this tax paid to a similar caste by a similar caste was called by the same or a similar name, being known as dub peace or cheese or blackmail, and otherwise as watch money. The chiefs to whom such tribute was paid were in the Highlands styled captains of watches, which when composed of gypsies were black watches. There is a hint that a kindred term was used or in use in the border districts. In the old tune, Black Bandsmen, Up and March. It is interesting to notice how this blackmail became gradually and insensibly legitimized. When in the beginning of last century, Henry Fall was received and ate at the tables of people in public office, he was tacitly recognized as holding a position that, if not actually official, was semi-official, the guardian, namely, of a certain district, conditional on his receiving a certain gratuity, which no one was foolish enough to withhold. But Will Fall, who probably succeeded him and who was buried at Jethum in 1783 to 84, occupied a position that was even less equivocal. Will exercised the functions of country keeper, as it was called, or restorer of stolen property, which he was able often to do when it suited his own inclination or interest, very effectually, through his extensive influence among the neighboring tribes and his absolute dominion over his own. What Henry Fall was in reality, Will Fall was in name, as well as in fact, and by the latter half of the 18th century, this official position of the gypsy, in parentheses, chiefs, was acknowledged in other districts. One of them, Patrick Gillespie, who was keeper for the County of Fife, has been figured to us as mounted on horseback armed with its sword and pistols, and attended by 4 men on foot carrying staves and batons or batons. Another Robert Scott, Rob the Laird, was keeper of the counties of Pebbles, Selkirk, and Roxburgh, and a friend of Mr. Walter Simpson stated that he was present when several gypsy constables or Peeblesshire were sworn into office. That in this last instance, the gypsies possessed certain racial characteristics may be gathered from the added comment that he never saw such a set of gloomy, strange looking fellows in his life. That in all these instances, the men were installed formally into such offices because of their extensive influence among the neighboring tribes, there can be no doubt. Thus, the wages which the county paid for them for maintaining order in the district and safeguarding the goods of the inhabitants was virtually a modified form of blackmail. The Peeblesshire farmer who never saw such a set of gloomy, strange looking fellows as those border chiefs may have been of the same race as, and certainly was, of one mind with the 16th century Ettrick men, whose lands and houses the ancestors of such common thief commonly called Egyptians had near hand harried hell, almost wholly harried, but had he expressed to them the surprise he felt that such offices should be held by men of whom not one had a permanent residence within the county, they might have answered him that since they and their forefathers had controlled that district for many centuries, no one was better entitled or better fitted to control it than they, and that although it was not the regular custom of their race to have a permanent residence anywhere, yet that territory, and that territory alone, had been the home of their people for many generations, and that although a newer race, or newer fashions, or both combined had made it the custom to dwell in towns of stone-built houses, and to live plodding, sedentary lives, yet at one time, the common building of their country had been those turf-built wigwams. Remember, the Gypsies, the swarthy indigenous people of this area, they lived where? In turf-built wigwams. We got this drop in the previous chapters, right? Which they still reared. And the common way of living had been predatory existence, which many of them still continue to follow. All right? Wigwams, just like a lot of the East Coast, Eastern Woodland Indians, Northeastern Indians, and many other indigenous tribes, right? They lived in wigwams. So that's the end of this chapter, all right? We're going to go on to chapter 8 in the next reading of this book, all right? Hope you guys enjoyed the reading. It was quick, but a lot of good drop. If you're new to this series, make sure to catch the previous episodes. So you can find a playlist if you go to my playlist tab on my homepage. Ancient and Modern Britons is called. You know, so far we got 11 parts. This is number 12. So make sure you catch up. Again, we read literally all of volume 1 of this book. We've read most of volume 2 so far. What we skipped is stuff we already kind of got before, generalized info. And we're going to continue to finish volume 2. So you can catch all the previous episodes or parts in the playlist in order. If you haven't checked them out, a lot of good drop, a lot of good information we've gone over. All right. So we're going to go ahead and end it there for today. And I'm trying to make it too long because the next chapter is a pretty long one. And the next chapter is just coming good information as well. It's going to get into someone else. It's going to start relating the Romanis with the Indians and all that. So we're going to go ahead and wait for that. Hope you guys enjoyed the reading. Again, thanks for listening to the end. Appreciate you guys taking the time to do that. Much love and respect. Pura vida, mi gente. Wow.